right, welcome back, everyone. We are out of executive session with no further information to discuss. No motions were taken, and we will resume the public session at 7:50. What do we have here? 7:49. Would we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Vice President Davis?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Just a reminder of the emergency exit to the rear of this building and to my right, your left, for the people in the audience. In the event of an emergency, please leave in an orderly fashion through these exits. Also, a reminder that South Country is a smoke-free school district. Smoking is not permitted in the building or anywhere on school grounds. This is also a hate-free and a bully-free school district. And having said that, welcome everyone to our February 15th meeting. First item on the agenda is the board consent agenda for item number C.
The administration recommends the approval of board consent items reflected in Schedule C1 through C3.
Okay, need a motion and a second for C1 through C3. Trustee Tara Kavanaugh? I have to get started. There we go. It's like muscle memory. Seconded by Trustee Barry. Any discussion on those agenda items? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Seeing all hands raised, the motion passes unanimously. Now we're up to communication and announcement, beginning with the superintendent's report.
And I'll let you know when to go full screen, Max, if that's okay. I'll let you know when to go full screen, not yet. Thank you.
Will you be going to the podium?
I will be. There's a lot of slides, and it's just
All right.
easier for me to. All right. Welcome, everyone. Sorry for the bit of a delay, so I'll try to get right to it with the superintendent's report. We can just switch over to the full screen.
Yeah.
Oh, it's already happened.
Yes, on the screen.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you. So we're going to get right started with the superintendent's report. Starting with, again, our usual COVID update. Again, we're not mandated to share these numbers, but I like to be sort of keep the community abreast as to what's going on. So far this year, as of February 10th, we've had 279 total cases or documented cases of COVID. Last week, there was a little uptick in the high school among students. So I don't know if there was a social event or something that went on. But really the question is, moving forward, is this something that we're just going to live with? Is it going to merit reporting, or are people just going to be required to sort of take care of themselves, sort of following the guidance that we have there on the right side? What can we do? Which is the same guidance that we've been providing for a couple of years now. The latest COVID resources are still available on our website, which opens up various links from the Department of Health. But nothing's really changed. If anybody watches the news, there is sort of this buzz about May 11th being the official declaration of the end of the pandemic. I'm not too sure what that means, because I do think that we'll still be feeling the effects of it for a couple of years to come, but I think there's going to be an official end date. But like I said, I don't know exactly what that means, but we certainly will keep reporting these numbers until we feel like there is no need to. Moving up, Groundhog Day. What is up with the weather? The last couple of days have been really unseasonably mild, and it made me question, sorry, I need to get my notes, but it made me question weather forecasting and the accuracy of weather forecasting and the significance of Groundhog Day. So a couple of weeks ago, just to sort of bring this back, we had a couple of snow flurries on 2 consecutive days that were not in the forecast. And on one morning, I actually woke up to about 1/2 inch of snow and checked my weather app. The app indicated 0% chance of snow. So what's up with weather forecasting? So it seems like groundhogs, which are featured here, might be more reliable. Can we rely on Puxtawanny Phil, Holtzville Hal, Malvern Mel, and Staten Island Chuck? And that's just a few of the groundhogs that have been charged with predicting the weather, predicting whether or not we're heading for a long winter. Well, this practice has been around since 1886, and Puxtawanny Phil, the most prominent of the groundhogs, has about a 37 to 40% accuracy rate, depending on source, which sounds pretty consistent with the technology used to predict our weather, especially given the recent forecasts and how they seem to change on a daily basis. What I learned during this week was that we have our own groundhog in South Country, which is Brookhaven Bob. And Mrs. Drake's kindergarten class on an annual basis goes out to check out Groundhog Bob. Groundhog Bob was named after a former Brookhaven principal, Bob Espo. And basically the students charted how many of these groundhogs actually saw the shadow. And if you can see that number, 2 saw the shadow, meaning that we're going to have a long winter, or 6 more weeks of winter, and 3 did not see the shadow, which means that we're going to have an early spring. So if you look at law of averages, it seems like they're indicating an early spring. I have to mention, and much to my disappointment and to the disappointment of the children, Groundhog Bob is not an actual groundhog, but a stuffed animal, but we still check his shadow on an annual basis, and I thought that would be something nice to share. So thank you, Ms. Drake at Brookhaven, for sharing this information with me. I thought it was really cool and a great experience for our students. And if you look in that photo, there's snow on the ground. Next, we had mini civics day at Kramer Elementary School, which was a lot of fun. I was invited to Kramer by Miss Santa Romita, and her 3rd graders shared their persuasive speeches with decision makers, Principal Clark, and the superintendent, myself. So they basically had an audience of people who actually could decide in some of their advocacy. And they also did it for an audience of 2nd graders, and they were fantastic too. So here are basically our seeds of civic readiness. And so not only are they adorable, but they spoke about some really cool topics. Taeja White advocated for healthier lunch choices, which I thought was fantastic. She was really concerned about calories and diabetes. Astra Okano advocated for better beverage choices in the cafeteria. Amira Ansari advocated for more recess. David Brito advocated for more yoga in classrooms and mindfulness. Elizabeth Bryan advocated for protective pool fencing. In fact, her family raises money to provide families with protective fencing to prevent drownings from young kids. So I thought that was really cool and fantastic. And Mackenzie Bassett Gilbert advocated for more outdoor activities, even citing some research indicating how our cognitive function goes up, our overall health and well-being goes up, the more time we spend outdoors. I just thought it was incredible, and I needed to share this. The only thing I found suspect is whether or not Principal Clark should be considered a really credible decision maker, especially on this 101st day of school, considering the outfit he's wearing. So I just wanted to share that as well. And happy 101st day of school. That's actually today. So we're well past the halfway mark. And alongside him is also Miss Santa Romita, who invited me for these wonderful speeches by these kids. I had the good fortune also to learn about Frank B. Long and the robotics programs, and that's the Lego robotics, that I'm sure Trustee Trent will enjoy hearing about. The Frank B. Long students participated in the 2023 Lego tournament held at Huntington High School on Sunday, February 5th. The Lego robotics team placed 12th out of 28 teams, which is pretty good. And the goals of the first Lego League Challenge is to engage in research, problem solving, coding, and engineering. And this includes building and programming a Lego robot that navigates numerous missions of a robot game. As part of the Lego Challenge, teams also participate in a research project to identify and solve a relevant real-world problem. So I want to say congratulations to 5th graders Olivia O'Sullivan, Darwin Fuentes, Keith Settinger, Jaden Killerman, and 4th graders Grayson Scotty, Noah Wright, and Zaya Zikovsky. They designed a robot that earned 185 points at the Robot Games and completed an innovation project to deal with the world's energy problems. These students worked twice a week after school from October through February to finalize a robot and create a presentation for a judge to watch and ask questions, and we were super proud of their accomplishments. And I want to give a big shout out to their advisors, Mr. Perkins and Mr. Totora. They're the Robotics Club advisors. Very well done, so I wanted to share that. Next, I had the privilege of also visiting another elementary school, Critz Elementary School, for Snuggle Up and Read. And it was great to see families engaged in some good old story time. More than that, I loved witnessing our young learners enjoying traditional books. Featured here is Trustee Hayes, who may have missed her calling as a teacher, but she read about fireflies. And one thing I learned from her presentation in her book is that in Australia, fireflies are called glowworms. So that was pretty cool, and so did the kids. Doors were decorated by staff, including Ms. Watson's classroom, which hosted Trustee Hayes, and was decorated by Melinda Link, which is one of our clerical staff, which was also really cool. I do want to give a shout out to all the staff members who participated in this photo. We have Ms. Kelly, Ms. Nolan, and Ms. Tooker for going all in with their costumes, and that beautiful Rapunzel door that was decorated. And of course, we had to take a selfie. And I wanted to give a shout out to our visitors and volunteers. Obviously, Principal Mazziotti for inviting the pt2 to participate in this event. CJ Quartercio, a Bellport Middle School student who helped out. Julie Quartercio, Jen Roth, Leah Roth, who's a high school student who also helped out. Bridget Johnston and Jen Pontecorvo. So I want to thank everybody for helping out and participating. Reading is in fact fundamental, and please engage your children in story time whenever possible. You're never too old for it. Another fantastic Friday night in the South Country School District was the Addams family. I have no words that can convey how awesome the Addams family was. It was a great Friday night at the theater. I want to give a big shout out to Ms. Hartman, Ms. Gallagher, Mr. Finnegan, Mr. Sherlock, Mr. Ferrara, Mr. Curcio, and Ms. McMillan for all doing their part to make this production happen. Of course, a big shout goes to the student crew, the pit orchestra, and the wonderfully talented cast. They did an awesome and fantastic job. And of course, special thanks to parents and community members who all lend a hand in making this happen. And much to my surprise, even Mr. Fobel made an appearance on stage, and perhaps he too missed his calling. It was a funny little start to the show, so great time to have you, by all of us. But again, just astounded at the talent. Staying with high schools, our athletes continue to get accolades. Our varsity boys basketball team are division champions with an overall record of 15-1 in league play. They are currently the number 3 seed in the division and are slated to play Northport this Friday night at 5 p.m. Admission for the Section 11 event is $7. It's going to be hosted here right at Bellport High School. And a shout out to Coach Grossi, who was voted as the Division I Coach of the Year by Section 11. So congratulations to the team, and lots of luck to them on Friday night. A shout also goes to Coach Maragiolio, Coach Cuffey, and Coach Fabian for an outstanding wrestling season. 12 wrestlers competed in the county championships featuring Thomas Smith, Henry Caceres, Cameron Howard, Mikhail Anthony Neris, Bobby John, Luke Rodriguez, Jacob Snedeker, Jaden Green, Charlie Maragiolio, Isaiah Green, Joan Solomon, and Colin Orsino. And among those kids, or students or athletes, 2 were all county champions, which is fantastic. This was Jaden Green, who's a high school student, and Cameron Howard, who participated as a varsity wrestler, and he is currently in 7th grade. And he was an all-county champion for his weight class. So big shout out to all the wrestlers, and congratulations to them. Doesn't stop there. Our girls varsity bowling team had a playoff berth this year by earning a spot at the wild card, so I want to congratulate them on a winning season. And finally, girls winter track athlete, sophomore Ella Mason, qualified for the state indoor championship for the 100-meter run. So shout out to our 2 coaches, Coach Batanjo and Coach Johnson, which Bryn might know. That's her mom. But parents who are pictured here are super proud and really appreciative of the coaches' support and leadership in helping Ella get her there. So we want to wish her luck in the state championship. And again, lots of sources of Clipper pride through our athletics. There's more. Happy to have been offering some expanded learning opportunities at Bellport High School as well. We're really excited to be collaborating with Cepa Mujer. This organization, which is based in Patchogue, serves to empower women, specifically Latina women. This organization has been around for 28 years. They also provide a program called Girls Act, which is committed to creating a safe space for growth, mentoring, and leadership or leadership development for Suffolk County's Latina youth between the ages of 14 and 20. What's really fantastic about this program that we hosted at the high school, that the program was facilitated by a Bellport High School grad by the name of Natasha Torres. She graduated in 2018 and now is a facilitator of this program. So it was great to see her come back to the high school and engage with these young students. So I want to thank Ms. Tetuan, Ms. Karp, and Principal Del Rosa for helping making this happen. This will be a monthly meeting with these young students at no cost to the district. They offer all sorts of job training, wellness training, and all sorts of support for these young ladies. So really fantastic to have that program. And a little more informal was really excited to have been invited to Dr. Kucheravenko's classroom. She teaches French and she was hosting a digital cooking video contest, an international video contest, which Ms. Doyle also had the pleasure of attending. Students created dishes from France, Germany, India, South America, and Russia, and they were judged on their creativity, complexity, and their entertainment factor. And yes, the videos were very entertaining to watch. This was all delightful. I do have one criticism, and that is I wish they would have brought some samples of the dishes they cooked, because I would like to have savored them. So, but big shout out to our world language program and really creating these eclectic experiences for our students, which is fantastic. Next, I want to talk a little bit about PS I Love You Day, which was observed last Friday, February 10th. Just to give you a little background, on April 23rd, 2010, just 1 week after her 14th birthday, the De Palma family, which is from West Islip, experienced a tragedy. On that beautiful Friday morning, Brooke De Palma, which was a middle school student at that time, was dropped off to her middle school by her father, Joseph De Palma, to her school. And when before the school day ended, this is upsetting, Brooke was informed that she had lost her father due to suicide. In response, the family decided to pay it forward and do something to make a difference. And so they started this organization called, or this sort of movement called PS I Love You, which is observed in schools across Long Island and is actually expanding on a national level. Their mission is to bring awareness to the importance of mental health, to decrease bullying. They strongly believe that by educating students earlier about mental health, the conversation will be easier to discuss, and students will be able to recognize when others are in need. On the second Friday of every February, they encourage communities to wear purple in order to foster kindness and a welcoming environment, and to educate others that mental health is just as important as physical health. So the 2023 theme, which is displayed here on screen, was, in life, we are presented with different events. Some are highlights that lighten up our life. Other times are challenging and have us reflect on our inner strength. Love all your chapters reminds us that each moment in life creates our story. Cherish each moment, because these moments are what makes you stronger. Always remember, your next chapter is blank. You have the power to make it yours. And that was a thematic element for this year. And multiple buildings in our district engaged in this wonderful event on Friday, February 10th. These are some pictures from various buildings, from Frank P. Long, from the middle school. I have more photos from the middle school. As you can see, people wore purple and embraced the day and the whole concept of just spreading love and kindness, which I think is wonderful. And the high school went all out in decorating various doors, which was also fantastic. Up there on the right, there was a black door that at first kind of made me step back and say, this doesn't seem very purple or festive. But on the very bottom, there's a message, and the message read, and I'm going to move up so I can see it from my screen here, but it says, "These decorations are humbly dedicated to all who are in a very dark and desolate place, but fight and make it through the 24 hours. You are not alone." Which is really such a nice statement to make for those people who feel that there's no one out there that cares for them. So I thought that was fantastic. Not only was it a day full of love, it was a beautiful day, just weather-wise, and I got to spend some time in the courtyard at the high school with some students who were enjoying lunch. So again, really amazing just show of support for one another and community at multiple buildings in our district. So I really felt it was important to highlight that. And finally, it is Black History Month, and I wanted to mention some of the things that we're doing to sort of acknowledge the month. But February marks Black History Month, and there's already been great programs at each of our schools. One of the things I've always emphasized as an educator is that Black history is really an important part of our collective American history. Black History Month as a concept originated back to 1915 by a Harvard historian and scholar, educator, and publisher, Carter T. Woodson, and a prominent minister, Jesse E. Moreland. They founded what is today known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, that originally sponsored a History Week back in 1926. Choosing the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. That's a little known fact I was not aware of. In the decades that followed, the celebration grew across the country with an increased awareness subsequent to the civil rights movement back in the 1960s. It was actually President Ford who in 1976 officially recognized Black History Month, calling upon the public, and I quote, to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. So we certainly celebrate the month through this day. We've had various activities at each of our schools, and I'm happy that this tradition's continued here in South Country to celebrate the many achievements and contributions of African Americans that they've made, and also have had a positive effect on all our lives as Americans. This is another mechanism by which we can appreciate the value of our overall diversity. And when you consider the demographic makeup of many communities on Long Island, we're extremely fortunate to learn in a place that is not only diverse, but values, celebrates, and cherishes its diversity. And yet another example of Clipper pride. So at the high school, they had an event. It was a Black History Bingo, where kids engaged in a bingo game based on historical figures. Just this afternoon, we had Afro Beats, which was a wellness program and a dance program that talked about nutrition and movement. As you can tell, there was even a dance off. And tomorrow night at the middle school, we have a wonderful program scheduled, which is called Night of Black Excellence. That's going to be held at the middle school tomorrow at 6 p.m. So excited about all these events and our ability to observe Black History Month in a meaningful manner. That concludes my superintendent report for this board meeting. And as always, feel free to follow us on our via email, through our community portal, where there's a link in our main website. There's a superintendent's corner, which is updated on a monthly basis. If you hit that link, it opens up the corner, which also has my contact information, my Twitter feed, and my weekly update. So I encourage community members to please check out our website and keep up to date. And there's a whole lot more happening in South Country. I only try to capture, I feel like I captured just a small portion of it. So big shout out to all of our staff and students that make this place such a wonderful place. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm trying to be technically savvy, and I watched your presentation on the YouTube channel. And now I can't get back to my agenda. So we'll get it. Yeah, let me look at yours. Oh, we're up to the trustee and advisory
Yes.
committee reports.
President.
And we'd always like to start with our student representative.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Johnson.
As Mr. Santana said, this past Friday, Belport High School participated in PS I Love You Day, and it was a great day at Belport High School. The week leading up to PS I Love You Day, students took part in various PS I Love You Day activities that took place in the library. The PS I Love You Day committee, which consisted of students and staff, decorated the lobby and hallways after school on Thursday. Students wore purple, and student council handed out purple leis to students upon arrival to school on Friday morning. Kindnessgrams were given out, which were cupcakes and chocolate flowers, and doors were decorated purple with motivational quotes, like you saw up there. Overall, the school atmosphere was super positive. Belport united to bring awareness to suicide and bully prevention. It was an amazing day and a good way to bring Belport High School together to fight for a common cause. I also wanted to say thank you very much for allowing us to go on the ski trip. It was a very successful trip and everyone had an amazing time. We're hoping to do it again, and everyone was talking about the memories that they will take with them forever. I have a lot of pictures from that day, so I'm going to make a Google Drive and then I'll share it with the board. And we would like to go whitewater rafting on May 21st in Pennsylvania to recognize everything the student council members have done this past year. It's a great way to bond and one of the best team building experiences. We are continuing the cold weather gear drive after break, and we are getting ready for a Spirit Month, which takes place in March. Each Friday is a different theme, and we're planning those dates now, and they'll be announced when we get back from our break. That's everything.
Thank you. I think you might be pushing the whitewater rafting. That sounds real dangerous.
They used to do it years ago, but then they stopped doing it.
Jim Thorpe?
What's that?
Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
You know where it is? Yeah,
That's
I used to
where-
get into fights with my son because he wouldn't steer correctly.
Oh, you went there?
I've been there several times. It's a lot of
That's
fun.
where we were.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I went
Just
there,
teasing
it's
you.
nice.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never been.
And not that dangerous. It's like it makes you feel like it's dangerous, but.
Not that you're just skilled, you know.
No, I have no skills.
On how skilled you are. Now, there was, the girls varsity volleyball, basketball finished their season. And I
Oh, yes,
understand
last
you did,
Wednesday.
I understand you did quite well your last game or two.
Thank you, yeah.
How many points did you score that game?
The last game I had 40 and the game
40, just
before
40?
35.
40 and then 35. You were quite a presence on that team. And
Thank you.
it was a joy to watch you.
Thank you.
And you have, and everyone is returning next year, correct?
Yeah, we had no seniors, so that's good.
So, yeah, looking forward to next year.
Yeah,
All
we'll
right.
grow the team.
Well,
from where we were
congratulations
this
on a
year.
good
Thank you.
season.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
All right. All right, who would like to begin? Mr. Barry?
I don't have much to report, just wanted to do a shout of Clipper pride to add to Mr. Santana's comments earlier. For Black History Month today at work, I got the opportunity to meet a former South Country School Board President, James Banks. I was speaking on behalf from Suffolk Community College, but amongst his proudest moments before I introduced myself to him, saying I'm on the board now, was he was talking about the pride he had, and what he was most proud of was his time at South Country with the school board, and I thought that was neat. And then he went on to do a great presentation as well. But all in all, great reports to hear from the superintendent, and congratulations on the season.
Thank you.
Just a couple quick things, and yeah, I did appreciate the report. P.S. I Love You Day is a really important day, and it was nice to see a representation of what happened in those buildings. A couple of those things really struck a nerve, so it was really nice to see that be recognized. I just, like, I've lost 2 people to mental health in my life, so it's really nice to see that be recognized by people of all ages, right? Sometimes people just, we always talk about kids, but you tell the story about how P.S. I Love You started, it was an adult, and the 2 people I knew were adults. So it's nice to really just make sure that we're all being reminded of how serious it is. It was a great week of sports. Congratulations to, you said, the bowling team, the wrestling team. I didn't get to see either of them compete this year. I usually make it to 1 or 2 meets a year, and I didn't this year. What a great ending to basketball season. To that point, I was at the last game of the season. I watch a lot of basketball, and I love basketball, and this is like my Christmas, because high school playoffs is starting. March Madness is a month away. I mean, this is like my time of year. But I got to tell you, I don't know that I've ever seen as gutsy a performance on a basketball court as Bryn's performance in that 40-point game. If there was a chance that we were going to pull that game out, it was going to be on Bryn's back. So, and I'll let everybody know, as sweet as Bryn is, she's a little mean on the court. I pick up on some of those things. Okay, I saw that arm bar, I saw a few elbows. A good thing I know your family, I know where it comes from, and everything else. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a big week too, because your brother scored a goal in his first game up at Lehigh, right?
Yeah.
Recently graduated, Curran, Bryn's brother. So that was great. And on the same night that Bryn scored her 40, Samir Bell had 36 in the season finale, the regular season finale for the boys against Center Each. So really exciting. I'm like giddy for Friday night. Like, I can't wait. I love it. I'm so excited to watch them play and compete. And I think it's going to be a real fun season. And congratulations to Coach Grassi for a much-deserved Coach of the Year. I think he's done a great job with this team, as he always does. And this team has a chance to do something special. So I'm real excited. So look forward to seeing everybody on Friday night. That's it.
All right, thank you. Trustee Kavanaugh?
Sure, just one item, a quick update from the Teaching and Learning Committee, chaired by Ms. Doyle. We discussed restructuring the schedule for the 6th graders to kind of make their experience a little bit more like a middle school experience rather than a grammar school experience. But one very exciting result of that will be that those students that participate in reading extra help will now have the flexibility in their schedules to also participate in the music program. So I think that's a big benefit to our 6th grade students. And we had a presentation on the amazing success of our dual language program, which is being very well attended and has had great success over the past few years. That's all. Thank you.
Trustee Philippines?
Nothing today.
Trustee Kavanaugh?
No, I have nothing else to add.
Trent? sorry. Vice President Hayes.
Okay, I'm not gonna repeat what trustee Kavanaugh said or Mr. Santana with regard to the events that I attended, and those were all fun. And just for anybody listening, going to the musical at the high school, you don't have to be a trustee to go and have fun. Members of the community are invited as well. It's open to the public. So I enjoyed that as well. But during the last 2 weeks, I've had hours of going to different meetings and being on Zoom meetings with the New York State School Boards Association, all about budgeting and the governor's budget and what to expect and the efforts that the New York State School Boards Association is making to get legislative changes that will benefit all of us. And I'm very grateful that we have all of those resources that we can work with, because it's got a lot of people working on behalf of school districts across New York State who have the knowledge and the ability and the success of getting some changes that are vastly needed for us. So just to sum up, one of the things I've gotten from going to these various meetings is that all school districts are in a state of dealing with challenges, and no school district is going to have the exact challenges that another district may have. So, but again, with everybody that's working in the area, there's a wealth of knowledge and a lot to rely on. And I'm very confident that we're up to it, and we're, from what I hear reported, in some ways we are ahead of the curve on a lot of issues. So I'm just feeling upbeat as we're going into this budgeting process, as grueling as it is. So thank you for that.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. And I'll just echo the comments that were already made about the high school play, The Addams Family. It was a fantastic night and very, very enjoyable. Also the meetings that, I'm sorry, I'm having sinus issues tonight, that Vice President Hayes already spoke to. We attended the virtual Capitol Conference for 4 hours on a Friday morning, loaded with all kinds of information that Ms. Hayes just mentioned, and further reports will be coming out from the both of us for the rest of the board. And also attended the strategic planning and the legislative breakfast that is held annually at Longwood High School, and more information to follow. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any cards? No cards? Okay. All right. Items for discussion. Mr. Superintendent.
All right, the first item for discussion is the Board Advisory Committee start times. We had a request for Trustee Trent to think about the, perhaps revise the policy, but at least reflect on a start time of 5:30 for all committees. So one of the things we said that perhaps we should let the committees kind of discuss it among themselves to see what would be most workable for the committees. So I don't know if the trustees, certainly for our strategic planning and advisory committee, we typically meet at 5:30, which seems like a time that was reasonable for that strategic planning. I don't know if the discussion came up by teaching and learning, Trustee Kavanaugh?
It did not. Did it?
It did, they changed the time, right?
No, that was just for the next meeting.
Oh, it was just.
Yeah, I don't think that's.
No,
gonna
that
be-
was a report about how it's scheduled for the rest of the year. And
Right, I
it-
think just the next meeting is at 5:30, and then they're going back to 4:30.
My understanding, the meetings were scheduled that way from the beginning, and it was to accommodate the evening events.
Right.
So we were able to do 5:30 because there weren't evening events that night. The 4:30s were because there were evening events and that they didn't want to conflict with events that were going on in the buildings.
So is there,
Health and Safety Committee meeting?
I don't think we've met since we've had the discussion.
We've met once.
Right, I think the last health and safety meeting was before the last school board meeting, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we may have to revisit, again, the idea is how do we accommodate the most people? To Ms. Doyle's point, sometimes starting at 5:30 interferes with evening events at the schools. It also represents a late start time for any committee members that might be employees of the district. So in reality, what the discussion was is to have a conversation among the committee members to see what was most workable. So it's something we need to revisit, or at the very least have another meeting so that we can kind of solidify those times. Next item for discussion is the consolidated school calendar. It's a draft calendar that we shared with the Board of Trustees. We're going to be scheduling calendar meetings in the next few weeks to try to solidify the calendar for the upcoming school year. Typically that's done with the PTA, the Teacher Association, different sort of groups in the school district. So we come to consensus with school events and important dates that we look forward to. I don't know if there's any discussion or...
Just a question, I think is there an issue next school year with Easter and Passover?
So right now, Easter and Passover, that has not come across my conversation.
I think there's a couple of weeks spread this year, it happens every 5 years or so where there's a spread, isn't that next year?
So the first day of Passover is the 23rd, which is during our spring break. The tentative, and this is based on a BOCES calendar. I'm trying to find the Easter Monday is the first, right?
So that typically, so this has been a discussion as, how to satisfy everybody. I think the last time this happened, I think my oldest was like in first or second grade.
So the proposed calendar that we shared, Eastern Suffolk BOCES, is showing a 4-day weekend to capture Good Friday and Easter, or to recognize Easter on Monday. And then the full week, which is respectively March 29th is the Friday, which represents Good Friday on the calendar. And then April 1st is the Monday after Easter. Right now, those are tentative days off, or those are days off for the Eastern Suffolk BOCES calendar, which we typically follow. And then the spring break starts on April 22nd and runs that full week, which covers Passover falls during that week.
Okay, so Passover covers spring break, and we're giving Friday, Monday for Easter. We're giving Good Friday and Easter Monday?
That's the tentative schedule.
That's the tentative schedule that Eastern
Right.
BOCES is.
And this is basically the framework or the starting point of the discussion.
Okay. I'd just be curious to see how it is. Many districts are wrestling with this right now, and the consensus in some districts is a couple days around Passover and the week around Easter, but, that's what the discussion is, how do you decide where the week goes versus the couple of days?
Yeah, and I think from looking at it from just a purely instructional standpoint, if we do the week of Easter, that's going to be it's relatively close to the February break. So I don't know.
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
that
I'm
goes
not
into
advocating
the
for one way or the other.
Yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
saying that there's gonna be, it may come up in discussion, so it's something we need to be mindful of. Especially when you consider how, I know it's always a topic of how other school districts do it, because our staff lives in different districts, so it creates an issue. It's a bigger issue in Nassau than it is in Suffolk, from what I understand.
And that's why this process actually, some would think it's pretty obvious. We're in the holidays, let's have days off around the holidays, but to Trustee Puccini's point, sometimes there's conflicts when you have staff that have children in other districts, and sometimes spring breaks cannot be aligned. In my experience, most of the time, school districts, especially in a county, will try to align breaks as much as possible.
do they generally follow the BOCES calendar?
This is always this kind of the starting point.
And I think I heard you say that you will be having discussions with
it's part of the calendar development process.
Process,
So, you know, the PTA will have dates that they're interested in. We also consult with the different bargaining units, especially the teacher units, just to look at quarter end dates and those types of things.
Mhm.
Can I just ask one question about graduation?
Sure.
Graduation always used to be on a Thursday,
Okay.
and then it went to Friday. Is there any particular reason that you're aware of?
So as a former high school principal, we still need that data to close out the school year in terms of kids who are submitting work, ensuring they're earning the credits, and just closing out the school year.
Okay.
And if you look at the testing schedule, they pushed the last test almost the day before. Ms. Doyle may correct me if I'm wrong, I feel last year we had tests all the way up to that Thursday.
Yeah, we didn't know till the morning of graduation if some kids were
Right.
graduating.
Correct.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, it had to do with the testing schedule.
Correct.
The tests were pushed right up to the point, that's why we moved it. It was during the COVID years, but it had everything to do with the region's schedule.
But traditionally, we have our Friday night or Friday evening graduation. for the last-
It's always a topic of discussion here because it was Thursdays for so long. And you hear from grandparents when they have conflicting dates, because very few are on Thursdays.
Right.
So we were the anomaly. So if you're a grandparent, you got 2 grandkids graduating, you're usually pretty covered. So that was one of the things I was going, but be ready, because it does come up.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it earlier than the Friday because we need to ensure kids graduate. That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, sure.
Testing
That's
so
the
Of
late.
course. If that's the reason, that's the reason. I'm not advocating one way or the other.
And that brings us up to our next item for discussion, or as I like to call it, must-see TV, which is our third budget presentation. So I'm going to move up to back to the podium, and then when I get up there, I'll give our IT department the signal to start streaming it. So. All right, thank you. Welcome to our third budget presentation of our budget season. During tonight's presentation, we're going to be talking about or covering our expenditure review, which covers our expenditures that cover administration, transportation, and what we call allocated, which we'll talk about during the presentation. I want to again thank Ms. Agee, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Management Services, for really creating all the content for the presentation and collaborating with myself and putting together something that we hope is informative to the trustees and to the public and hopefully easier to understand. One of our methodologies that we sort of spoke about is to create these presentations and design them like lessons. There'll be an opening, there'll be a closure, a summary, because I think it's important that people really understand the budget process and not just the numbers that they represent. So let's get to it. Again, this is our schedule of budget meetings and presentations. I like to emphasize that the budget process is an ongoing process that begins, in reality, sometime in late November, but our presentations begin in January and they run through April, where the budget is ultimately adopted. This week, we're on our third presentation where we're going to be covering those specific expenditure codes. And then what I also want to emphasize is on April 5th, we revisit these codes because, again, these are projected budget expenditures. There's still data that needs to be acquired. There's still decisions that need to be made. So what you're going to see tonight are basically projections. These projections don't tend to change that much, but they potentially change during the course of the budget process. So again, we're going to revisit both our revenues and our expenses on the April 5th meeting. And this culminates in a budget hearing in May 3rd, which is followed by our budget vote and election on May 16th. Again, to give you a timeline, right now we're in this in-between stage of February and March. We're really starting to look at staffing in terms of FTEs, which are full-time equivalents. That's going to come up later in the presentation, but just as a reminder, we call full-time employees a 1.0 FTE. That's just the sort of the verbiage we use. So we start talking about staffing in February for things that we sort of have an understanding of. And then really in March, we start looking at actual staffing because that's all based on high school scheduling, course requests, and our enrollment. So you'll get those numbers when we have our staffing presentation in March. So right now, we're sort of in between the two, where we're looking at enrollment predictions, we're looking at ideas for programming, if there are going to be any changes or cuts. So that's where we're at in the process. Again, I'd like to review our first two budget presentations really quickly. Lots to consider when we create a budget. Number one, of course, is our board priority. Our board priority number 6 speaks to the development of a transparent budget. We also consider the fact that a lot of our budget comes from taxpayer money, so we have to be very mindful of how we put together a budget that's going to be efficient and not overburden our taxpayers and our community. But really the most important consideration to me is that we want to earn the confidence of the Board of Trustees and the trust of our community. So that's really what we go into considering when we need budgets. We use various resources, as I mentioned before, from our auditors to financial advisors to colleagues and positions in other districts and across the state. And of course, we listen to community input, trustee input, and we use technology and software to help make forecasts and predictions. And the budget process, again, is something that uses a mixed bag of strategies. Certain fixed expenses get rolled over, but we like to think that we try to do as much zero-based budgeting as possible, meaning let's start from the bottom up, see what we need, and see how much it's going to cost to make those programs happen. And we gather lots of information, and we consult. I cannot emphasize that enough, that we don't do this in isolation. We're doing it with all the Board of Trustees who provide input throughout this process when we have questions, because they're a great liaison between us as a school district and community members and their constituents. During our second budget presentation, we talked about some of the challenges that we have yet to face. Our Trustee Hayes alluded to this, but most school districts are dealing with inflation and the tax cap calculation. It's a challenge that we all share in common. We all share the fact that our federal grants that were given to us as in terms of COVID relief will come to an end after the next school year. That's the 24-25 school year. And our third challenge that's unique to us was the differential in building our state aid and bond payments. To mitigate those things, we sort of talked about different strategies that we're looking at in our long-term planning. The graph on the left, which was displayed again during our second budget presentation, represents a 5-year projection where you see that we're trying to get our revenues as steady as possible with a slight increase and keep our expenditures as flat as possible so that we mitigate sort of the ability to operate the school district in a sound manner. The yellow line at the bottom represents the use of our reserves. Again, right now we have healthy fund balances in our reserves. But the idea is we use them to sort of compensate for certain expenditures as like sort of allowable by the state, because there's very strict rules on how we can use reserves. And then the idea is you use the reserves to the least extent possible. In other words, they're there as a safeguard. But just to go over some of the sort of strategies used, number one is obviously a review of our programs to reduce expenditures, the use of attrition to reduce salary expenses, that's when people retire, the discussion of whether or not you replace those positions, to engage in ongoing capital improvement projects, which generates revenue in Building 8 in the foreseeable future. Our reimbursement rate for capital projects is 76.2%, which is paid back to the district over the course of 15 years. And there are different ways you can generate or engage in capital projects. Number one is a capital reserve vote. We had a capital reserve vote in October for $2.6 million. Again, the public votes to use funds that are already in our bank accounts, but the public has to vote on what we're going to use or what the capital improvements will be. For the capital reserve vote that we approved in October, we covered some safety upgrades, a turf field at the high school, which is used by multiple sports in our PE classes, and safety upgrades in terms of our camera system, our locking mechanisms, and some other security upgrades. So that's $2.6 million in capital improvement projects that are going to be completed over the course of the next couple of years, and ultimately will generate revenue in the form of building aid. Another strategy we're looking at is an energy performance contract. That's a budget neutral way to engage in capital improvements. Basically, we contract with a company that basically contracts with other contractors to do energy performance work. which makes the school districts greener. They upgrade our facilities in terms of our energy consumption, and it's paid through by the savings you get from the energy savings. Energia, which is a company that we're speaking to, basically projected that we could engage in $5.6 million worth of capital improvements, which are budget neutral. In other words, the money is going to be paid for by savings. And they guarantee this in the form of a check where they pay the differential. So if they say you're going to save $100 in your first year and you actually save $90, the company cuts you a check for $10. And I know that's oversimplified, but that's basically the mechanism by which it works. There's been numerous school districts that have engaged in this practice, and it's all been really positive and successful. This does not require a public vote, and I just, for the sake of transparency, the reimbursement rate for energy performance contracts is 66.6%, or 66.4%, I apologize. Another mechanism by which we can engage in capital improvement projects that are state aidable is having a capital transfer budget line, which we're proposing in this year's or the upcoming school year's budget. This allows the school district to engage in ongoing capital improvement projects at a budgeted amount, and again, that generates revenue in the form of building aid for years to come. And of course, the contemplation of future bond proposals. As I mentioned, we probably have somewhere in the vicinity of $80 million worth of work that the district can use. So the idea is, how do you get those improvements accomplished in a very reasonable manner? A lot of districts will engage in several bonds over the course of several years, small bonds that really serve to resolve immediate concerns, and you prioritize them. But if you do it every few years, you essentially create an ongoing revenue source for the foreseeable future. So those are all different strategies that we are contemplating. We're not proposing a bond this year or perhaps next, but it's just something to contemplate for the future. Again, the ongoing exploration of alternative revenue sources, donations, grants that all can help offset expenditure costs, and of course the strategic use of reserves to the extent possible, which I mentioned a little earlier. This is spoken to in more detail during our second budget presentation. We also talked about the tax cap and revenue overview, and we had these essential questions in our last presentation. What is a tax cap? What is the difference between a tax levy and a tax cap? How is it calculated, and what role does the tax cap play in the budgeting process? And I just sort of summarized the responses to those questions. Again, the tax cap is based on legislation that was passed in 2012 by legislators to basically allow school districts to ask for tax levy increases so they can mitigate increasing costs in the operation of the school district, but also a cap so that they don't overburden or overtax their communities. The tax cap is based on an 8-part formula, which is mandated by the State Comptroller's Office, and it contains values that are fixed, meaning that we have no control over, with the exception of what's called exclusions that we can add. And exclusions represent costs that are not associated with the general operating costs of a school district. So if you have to do new construction that's not a part of the normal operations, the state kind of allows you to factor that into your formula. The anticipated tax levy limit for South Country is going to be 4.64%, which includes this capital transfer line. I want to emphasize again that the anticipated tax levy limit, which is a cap for South Country at 4.6%, does not represent the anticipated tax levy increase. It simply indicates that limit at which we can have a budget approved with a simple majority versus a supermajority if we decided to pierce that limit. And I can say with confidence that we're not going anywhere near the 4.6%. And finally, the tax levy limit or tax cap does not factor into the budgeting process because we don't work backwards from a tax levy limit. The goal is to propose a tax levy increase that meets the needs of the district without overburdening the taxpayer, and that's what we're going to do. We also talked about revenue, and basically the revenue piece is probably the simplest piece to explain, but about half of our revenue comes from the tax levy, that's taxpayers, and this is what we vote on. About 40% comes from state aid. There's other revenue that includes pilots, etc., which is about 7%. And then there's appropriated fund balances, which isn't really revenue, but monies that are used to offset expenditures that go on the revenue side. When you look at a ledger, it could be a balanced budget, but aren't exactly revenue. They're taken from funds that we already have. And that goes about 5%. So that brings us to today's presentation, and that was just a summary of the last two presentations. And tonight we're going to be talking about administration, transportation, and allocated expenditure codes. That's 1,000, 5,000, 9,000 codes. And the essential questions for today's lesson are, what guides a school district's accounting? What funds or revenues are used to pay expenditures? And what do the budget codes mean? We're also going to be talking about what expenditures are included in the 1,000 code, which is administration, otherwise known as general support, and what is the projected budget for administrative expenditures. We're going to be talking about what expenditures are included in the 5,000 code, transportation, and what is the projected budget for expenditures for transportation. And finally, what expenditures are included in the 9,000 code, which are unallocated expenditures, which is a little hard to describe in a sentence, but we'll describe in further detail in a later slide. And just as a reminder, I'm going to ask the Board of Trustees to hold your questions to the end. So we'll get through the lesson, and then I'll be happy to go back to the slides and answer questions as they come. So first, we'll talk about budget codes and their meaning. So what guides district accounting? Well, they're guided by generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. I know that sounds like it's something I made up, but it's an actual sort of strategy used to account for accounting in school districts. This is the same practice that's held in every school or public school district, and so business officials basically are trained in this practice. And here's a little recall, a little memory. Revenues are any funds that are coming into the district, and expenditures, of course, are funds that are leaving the district. And budget codes signify both the revenue source and the associated expenditure in detail. This is what these letters and numbers mean. Revenue codes, or what we call funds, those are monies, or governmental funds, are separated into 4 funds here in South Country. We have a general fund, which is coded as A. That's basically our revenue source for all of our expenditures. We have the school food service program, that's also aided by grants, special aid, which is aided by grants, and capital projects has its own fund because, again, the capital work is restricted and it's managed in a different manner. So those are basically revenue codes, and even though they're in the budget under the expenditures, I kind of conceptualize them as revenue codes because the letter A, for example, indicates the general fund, which is our major fund. The expenditure codes, which are the codes for the expenses, which again are all paid by the general fund, and especially are the administrative, which are the codes 1,000 through 2,000 basically, and those are all expenses associated with running the school district in general. Instruction is a 2,000 codes, transportation 5,000, employee benefits, debt service, and interfund transfers are all what we call the unallocated or undistributed expenditures in the 9,000 code, which we'll talk about in more detail in a little bit. And what I want to emphasize again is that budget codes are nearly uniform in every school district. So when you go from school district to school district, the numbers signify basically the same things. And they include functions, objects, and locations, which I'll talk about next. First, expenditure codes, which are the function. The term function refers to the primary classification description as to the purpose of this expenditure. In other words, what is the purpose of the money that's being spent? This represents the first 4 digits identify the function. So when you look at the expenditure codes here, anything between 1,000 and 1,999, we know it's going to be an administrative cost or expenditure. Anything in the 5,000s are going to be related to transportation. So that's basically what that means. Next, we have what's called the object codes. The object of the expense, which is basically the 5th digit in the code, is a secondary classification that identifies the item purchased or the service obtained in order to carry out the function. So if you look at administrative, which is general support, or on the thousands, if you have 1,000.1, that's going to refer to personal services. And that refers to anything having to do really with employees, like salaries, etc. If you look at employee benefits, which is a 0.8, that would typically be attached to a 9,000 code. 0.8 would be the specific employee benefit that we're talking about. And you'll see what I mean when I give you a sample budget line. And then after the object code, we can expand the object codes with more specificity. So if you look at the personal services code, 0.1, and you add the digit 2, so it becomes 0.12 there in the bottom left, that represents teacher salaries, for example, K to 6. So when you look at the budget and you see 0.12 in the 1,000 code, we know we're talking, or I'm sorry, that would be in the instructional code, the 2,000s, you'll know we're referring to a specific expense. And they get further even specific by adding location codes. And location codes basically speak to the cost to include more detail as to a specific department, location, like a school building, or an activity accounting, or what we're doing in our program. So that's basically how the codes are broken down into the little bits and pieces. And what does it look like? Well, here's an actual code from our budget. The A represents the general fund that I spoke about. That's the fund. That's where the revenue is coming from. The 1010 represents the Board of Education. That's the function of the code. The 475 represents conference and travel. That's the object of the code, the services that we're paying for specific to the Board of Education. And the location, the 00 means it's district-wide, because the Board of Trustees is at the service of the entire district. And if they're attending conferences, for example, like NISBA conferences, they're doing on behalf of an entire district. Another budget line here, again, shows the code A, which is the general fund. The 2610 represents instruction, that's 2000s, and specifically the library, that's the function. The supplies is the object, so in other words, this is for supplies, for the library. And finally, the location code is 07, which means the high school. So that's how an accountant, or someone like Mr. Gee in the business office looks at this code and doesn't have to immediately knows what the code represents. And I have one more example, because I like to always do 3 examples. Again, general fund, transportation to 5,000. This is actually specifically student trips, that's the function. 400 is contractual services. So this is a budget for example, coach buses that are in district. So we have to contract out with a tour company. So that's where that indicates. That's the object, and the location for this particular code is 03, which represents Frank V. Long. So that's what budget lines look like. That's what those numbers represent, and that's how we kind of break it down. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty. So we're going to first talk about the 1000 code, which is administration. That entire code represents the administration or general support, are all the expenses associated with the general administration of the school district, and they cover the following areas. What we wanted to do for tonight's presentation is to chunk the information into bits and pieces that are a little bit more tangible and reasonable for you to sort of comprehend. So for the 1000 codes, we're going to break it up into the Board of Education, the district clerk, and our annual budget vote and election, and the expenditures associated with that. The central administration, which is the superintendent's office, staff, supplies and conferences, the business office, which includes equipment, supplies, contract services. Human resources, the same, staff, equipment, supplies, conferences, and contract services. Legal and public information, which includes our legal counsel, public relations, and related BOCES services. Operations and maintenance, that's our, basically all of our security, custodial staff, and related services. Utilities, fuel expenses, and those types of things. Central printing and data, self-explanatory. That also includes technology and internet services, and our insurance and association costs. Those are for all the various associations that we're members of. So now we're going to go into specifics. The first codes that I wanted to talk about is the 1010, which represents the Board of Education, our district clerk, 1040, and election. If you notice, there is an increase in the budget line from this current budget to the proposed budget, which really represents a correction in accounting and not an increase in expenditures. The district clerk salary was formerly on 2 budget lines, split between 2 budget lines, and we thought it'd be more efficient and better able to be tracked. We had that expenditure included in just 1 budget line, as you see here. So the biggest increase you see there really represents a correction and not an increase, because you'll see that that salary is reduced on another code, which is coming up. So this is basically a summary of these lines for these categories. Next, budget expenditures is the central administration. That is the superintendent's office and everything associated with the superintendent's offices, from salaries to conferences. Again, the district clerk salary is budgeted in the 1040 code you saw in the previous slide. So it looks like there's a decrease here, but that also doesn't represent a decrease. It just represents a correction in accounting. But for this group of budgets, it comes across as a decrease. Next, we have the general support or administration through our business office, which includes the salaries of everybody there, equipment, contract services, advertising, conferences. And advertising for the budget office can include budget brochures and that type of thing, supplies. What I saw, what's remarkable there is that the assistant superintendent for business Her salary is represented as a 0.85 or 85% of her salary is captured here, and 15% of the salary is budgeted in transportation because transportation is state aidable. And so what we do is we basically, what percentage of their responsibilities involve transportation, because in our district, the assistant superintendent for business is responsible or in charge of transportation. So can you hold it to the end, or?
I'll edit that, I got you.
Thank you, Cameron. Trustee Trent. But we'll come back. So in other words, you'll see that salary split into 2 budget lines. So I wanted to be transparent about that. The business office also added a civil service position, a senior accountant, to increase efficiency in our budget office. And finally, there is clerical assigned to both operations and maintenance and the business office because they show responsibilities. That's budget line 1310, where you see business office, and the salary is reflected in both. So if we could get some state aid where the responsibilities are split, we sometimes split the salaries among 2 budget lines. Next, we have the administration and business office continued. We pay our auditors, external, internal, our claims auditor, the treasurer. And again, here, there's a couple of notations. District treasurer salary was formerly on 2 budget lines, much like the district clerk. So we decided to put this expenditure on 1 budget line. So even though it looks like there's an increase, it just represents a budget correction, not an increase. And the other is pretty self-explanatory. We also have our human resources office expenses that also shows a decrease, which I can explain. First, I wanted to show that it almost seems like we're proposing an increase in the proposed salary for the assistant superintendent of human resources, but this does not represent an increase. The expenditure for the proposed upcoming school year, 23-24, represents the current salary. We don't propose changes at this point because those discussions haven't been had. The amount you see in the 2022-23 budget line was the line that was there before the negotiations happened, before the salary was changed. And we have to compare budget to budget, so we wanted to be transparent about that. The second point I want to make about this chart is that the staff salaries were reduced due to attrition. So you see a reduction in salaries, overall salaries for that office. Moving on is our legal and public information budget codes. Right now, we're keeping them flat until we have more discussions. As I said, this is proposed or projected. This may change, plus or minus, in the next few weeks, and we'll have a finalized budget for April. But as it stands, we're looking to keep things pretty flat on this end. We're looking also at our salary of our operations. That's our operations and maintenance, our custodial workers. There's clerical assigned to both operations and maintenance and the business office, so that salary is divided among those 2 budget lines, which I mentioned in the prior budget line. So I just wanted to mention that. So basically, you see a little decrease just based on some of the decisions we made in terms of decreasing revenues. Finally, this is a long list, but this is a lot of our basically utilities. If we're a homeowner, these are basically our utility expenses, equipment, energy, and that shows the most substantial increase. And basically, that increase generally represents inflation and rising energy costs. In this particular slide, sorry, I went too fast. Namely, when you look at things like natural gas or cartage and those types of things, fuel oil, we project that those expenses are going to go up in the upcoming school year, just based on inflation and rising energy costs. So you'll see a significant rise there. Next, we have our salaries for our safety officers, and again, we're projecting it to be flat, depending on any changes that are made. We'll reflect it in the April presentation, but again, we're trying to keep our budgeted expenses as flat as possible. When we look at our courier and central mailing, again, we're proposing actually a decrease in some of these expenditures. Sorry, I went too quickly. Which just represents just looking at, for example, supplies data processing, looking at prior actuals, and realizing that we can actually propose a lesser amount in the upcoming school year and still capture and do what we need to do with regards to that expenditure. We have our insurance, which that went very fast. My apologies. Our insurance companies, we don't really foresee any substantial changes, but you have to remember that We're projecting a flat budget line along these lines because even if it's flat year to year, budget to budget, we still think we could capture these expenses within this budget. So we didn't feel a need at this time to indicate any increases in these areas. Next, we go to the 5,000 code, which is transportation. Transportation includes budget lines for all student transportation costs, including salaries, contract services, and transportation to district schools, BOCES programs, special education programs, private schools, athletics, and field trips. All these budget lines are pretty much captured in one chart, and you can see it's broken up by buildings. It's broken up in salaries associated to transportation. And what I wanted to point out, a couple of things. Again, the assistant superintendent for business is in charge of transportation in our district. So 15% of that salary is allocated to this budget line here under transportation because it's state aidable. Another increase is that we allocated $29,000 for Frost Valley in Washington, D.C. to offset the cost of those grade level trips. How we offset the cost is something that we'll discuss because the whole premise is to provide more equity and to get more access to more students. So if we can incorporate some of these expenses into our district budget, it offsets the expenses for some families who may not be able to afford it. So I'm really excited about that and something we're able to capture in our budget proposal. Next, we have the most complicated, to me at least, as someone who is not an accountant, which is our unallocated expenditures. But unallocated or undistributed expenditures essentially mean that these specific codes are not assigned to the function which it is expended. Code 9000 includes the following. So what that means is some of these expenses represent employees' expenses, but they're not in employee lines. And when we look at the categories, that will make more sense to you. We have governmental obligations, which includes the retirement system, Social Security, Medicare, tax, FICA, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance that are typically tied to employees, but we're not putting them in staffing lines. They're their own budget lines. We have employee benefits, which includes life, disability, dental and health insurance, Medicare reimbursements, insurance, so on and so forth. We have also debt service and special aid, which includes serial bonds, principal and interest, tax and revenue anticipation notes and interest, which are called TANs. Are they TANs? Thank you. I have to confer with Mr. Gee. And transfer to food service fund and special aid fund. So those special funds are allocated for those specific purposes. So let's begin with governmental obligations, which are 9,010, 9,020, and so on and so forth. This includes our teacher retirement system, employee retirement system, Social Security, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance. As you see, there are increases that pretty much represent the general annual increases for these entitlements. Okay, those we really don't have much control over because we go based on the change. Next are the employee benefits that covers everything from life insurance, disability insurance, health insurance, and so on and so forth. There's a couple of things that stand out that I wanted to point out. The BTA sick leave was eliminated at $75,000. That does not mean that there will be no longer be sick leave payouts to BTA members, but those payouts are going to be paid from the terminal leave payouts and buybacks, which are included in that bigger figure, the $1.2 million figure, which can cover all these payouts altogether. So in an effort to clean up our budget for following budget seasons, we decided to eliminate those lines and cut those costs, essentially cut those costs from the budget without affecting our ability to have sick leave payouts to the BTA members. And that's pretty much what stands out most from this slide. Our next slide is our debt service and special aid. So serial bonds, that's our principal that we pay towards, our serial bonds interest, our TANs. The transfer to school service funds, I do want to talk about that, but I went a little bit out of order, but let's talk about the transfer to capital funds. You'll see that's a huge increase, or $1 million increase. When we talked about the interfund transfer line to engage in the capital improvement projects, this is where it goes in the budget. So that's going to represent an increase from the following year, where we didn't have this budget line, to where we're going to have it this year. The other decrease that stands out to me is the transfer to food service. The transfer to food service is reduced because the district now qualifies for community eligibility provision, which is called CPE. That's that federal provision that provides free breakfast and lunch to all students. There is still a cost to the district, but that cost is minimized. So once you qualify for CPE, our understanding is you always qualify, And that cost is approximately $240,000 a year, so we're budgeting $250,000 so that we could continue offering free lunch to all of our students district-wide. So I just wanted to point out those changes because they seem very substantial in this figure. And that pretty much concludes all those budget lines. We summarized it in this one chart. So when you look at the 1000s, we're looking at a 1.27% increase along those budget lines, a 1.32 increase along the 5000s budget lines, and the most substantial increase in terms of percentage is in the 9000s because it's including that interfund transfer line at a 3.23 increase for those budget lines only. So what I want to emphasize about these final figures is that, again, the total represents approximately 50% of the overall budget. So when you look at $70 million out of a $140 million budget, that's about 50% of our cost. So the 2.49% does not represent the tax levy. So I just want to emphasize that. That's just the increase in this portion of the budget. What I also want to emphasize is that percent change only applies to these budget expenditures and not the overall budget, which I just said. The budgeted expenditures are projected and may change prior to the final proposed budget. Again, we're going to be revisiting this in April, specifically April 5th, where we'll have finalized numbers. And finally, the most substantial increase, again, represents the addition of the interfund transfer line, which enables ongoing capital improvement projects that generate revenue in the long run. So we think it's important to include that. So that's a basic summary of these budget lines. And to answer our essential questions, a quick recap. So what guides the school district accounting? GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, which are universal among public school districts. What funds or revenues are used to pay expenditures? The general funds, which is where most of our funds are located. What do the budget codes mean? Well, they indicate revenue, which is the letter A in this case, function, the first 4 digits, object, the next 3 digits, and then location, which is the last 2 digits, so that we know what the expenditure, or at least people in the business office know what the expenditure applies to. What expenditures are included in the 1000 code, and what is the projected budget for those codes? Well, again, these are all the costs associated with the general administration and operation of the school district outside of our instructional programs and school buildings. We're looking at, for this particular category, a 1.27% increase. What expenditures are included in the 5000 code, which again is transportation, which is kind of self-explanatory, but that covers all costs associated with transportation, including field trips and athletics, including budgeting for class field trips. We're looking at a 1.32 increase in this budget category. And our final budget category, which is the allocated funds, I'm losing my powers of speech, in the 9000 codes, basically covers costs associated with employee entitlements and benefits, debt, and governmental obligations. And again, that included the interfund capital transfer line. And for that category alone, we're looking at a 3.23 increase. And that concludes our presentation. So at this point, I want to again go over our schedule. Next time around, on March 8th, we're going to be talking about curriculum and instruction, which is a huge chunk of our budget. We'll be talking about instructional programs, which will be followed by our staffing analysis, which will be followed by, again, a revisit of our expenses and revenue, and we'll culminate in the budget adaptation on April 19th. And we hope lots of people come out and vote on May 16th for our budget vote and election. So at this point, we'll go down to questions, and I know Trustee Trent has one, so if you refer to the slide, I'll go back to it.
Yes, I have 2.
Well, President Felice, would you rather go around the horseshoe, or since he raised his hand
Well, he
first?
raises his hand first, and then I think we will. We'll go back to Trustee Kavanaugh, and we'll go.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Trustee Trent,
And then give everybody a chance to speak once, and then we can go for a second round of questions.
sounds good.
All right?
So on page 30, the school,
At this point, you can stop streaming. Right.
the food service, the
Yes.
$704,000. So you mentioned free lunch indefinitely. Is that indefinitely? I'm sorry.
So basically, last year, the school district was anticipating what it would cost to provide free lunch for everybody. And I think the anticipated or projected cost would have been around $700,000. Because we qualify for CPE, which is this community eligibility provision, that cost was dramatically reduced to about $240,000. Once you qualify, our demographics and criteria is not going to change. The understanding is you qualify every year thereafter. So the cost remains the same in order for us to provide the service to all of our community members. So in other words, we'll be able to continue to provide free lunch for everybody in the school district. K-12.
And then my next question is on page 16. In reference to the salary for the business official,
Yes.
you mentioned that that is located in two spots, pieces of it.
Correct.
Is there a way that we can indicate that on the description line, what percentage of the salary we're looking at here?
Yeah.
It
So I
is.
did, it's 85% of the salary is what's depicted there, because that represents 85% of the workload. That's the way we look at it.
Where I don't see any
First dash.
Yeah.
.85, first asterisk on the bottom.
0.85 FTE represents 85%.
No, I mean at the actual description of the, on the budget line, not in the PowerPoint.
When we do the notes, when we do the notes, we'll include it.
Yeah, when we do
This
the
is-
notes,
this
we'll
is-
include it.
This is a little summary, we're gonna be giving a more detailed
Okay.
presentation.
But it still doesn't exist in the budget document. There's no notes in the budget document, I think is what he's referring to.
Yeah. When,
You mean the way it's slated? So in other words, where it says.
He wants it in
salary-
there in the
yeah,
code
so
where
you
it says
just have,
salary
you
for,
know, at the end of DW,
Oh,
whatever
gotcha.
percentage it is.
Okay,
That's all.
Okay.
And then it's also reflected somewhere else though.
correct.
And
15%.
But with the clerk's salary, we put that together and got rid of the other.
We did it for two salaries. We did it for district clerk and a treasurer salary.
Okay,
But now
but,
it's just one line.
okay, but this one, the salary is in two spots. Is that for any other employee we have salary in two
There's
spots?
a clerk that's split between the business office and maintenance and operations, so we can do the same.
Okay. I appreciate that. And that's
Did
it.
you take that note? Thank you.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
so we'll go down to horseshoe, or?
Yeah, I think President Felice had to step out, and she had it set up that trustee
All right.
Kavanaugh would be next.
I have no questions, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you.
Trustee Philippin, trustee
Your presentation.
Harry?
Your presentation seems to be in line with everything we've been discussing, trade shop.
Thank you.
and
So-
Mr. Puccini.
I don't know if I'm gonna have all of my question or if you're gonna have all of my answer tonight. I'm gonna say it's probably not. But I'm still, where I'm struggling, and I know we're in only at a second step of the process,
Right.
but not seeing it all pulled together, it's hard for me to understand where the $1 million capital line is coming from. Because if you look at the three codes and the way you have it summarized at the end, which I appreciate, is that this, I'm trying to get to it, is a total of, what was the number you had? Sorry, there's more, every time I think I'm at that slide, there's one more.
Flag 31.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm past, yeah, thank you. So there's a 2.49%, which is roughly $1.8 million in these three
Right.
codes. And $1 million of that is a new,
Right.
a new budget line. I'm assuming when we do the other codes, we're gonna see some significant cuts somewhere that's gonna fund this, because if the comment was, we're not gonna go up to the 4 point whatever the levy limit is, and we're already at 2.54 here, I'm just having a hard time of piecing it all together. So if you wanna say, wait, it'll come together,
That is the appropriate answer, not because I'm being deflective.
and I don't think you are, and I warned you at the beginning of the question that was gonna be your answer, so, but
So there's gonna be, the idea of having a flat budget is almost like impossible, just because of inflation. So
Understood.
the budget's gonna increase, so the idea is, can we make, to your point, and again, I'm giving a very oversimplified answer, can we make $1 million worth of cuts in other places so that that increase or the addition of that line theoretically becomes neutral, even if there's a budget increase?
Correct. And that is the question, and from the last presentation, I struggled with it, and now tonight, I understand we're not done,
Right.
but I'm having a real hard time understanding where we created that $1 million budget line from.
We didn't create it from anywhere. Again, right now it's a contract.
And I'm
You know
saying
what
it
I'm
has to
saying?
come from somewhere, so, cause what I'm, I don't wanna say I'm fearful of, but like, in the back of my mind, we're gonna get the rest of the budget codes, and there might be an oops, maybe we couldn't figure this out, right? I mean, like, what are they gonna look like comparative to this? If we're already at 1.8 million in an increase.
So again, there's different ways of looking at it. Can we add up all the cuts we made and see what that comes out to? And if it comes out to $1 million, do we say that we made enough cuts to sort of accommodate for this line? If it doesn't add up to exactly $1 million, then the discussion means, is it worth having? Because again, if you do this on an annual basis, once it's in the budget, it's in the budget. So if you compare 24-25 to 25-26, it's not gonna be as impactful once it's already there. The impact, from my perspective, and from Mr. Gee's perspective, is the fact that we'll be able to generate revenue. And again, the revenue is not that substantial in the first year, but actually there's two things. Number one, we need to engage in ongoing capital improvements. We do. And I would even argue that even if there was no reimbursement, I would argue that we should have some sort of capital improvement line in our budget. We don't. Even if it wasn't budget neutral, even if we couldn't find a way to cut $1 million worth of expenditures, I still stand by my position that I think it's worth having that budget line in the budget.
And I'm not saying I disagree with you. I know we have to do capital budgets, and I know we have to create revenue. I just haven't seen where you're getting it from. And so I'm assuming, and maybe to put me at ease a little bit, at some point, you guys you're somewhere down the road, although it's not ready for us. I mean.
So I'm gonna give you an example. When we looked at, Trustee Trent, what was the slide you asked about? The number was 20 with the transfer of food?
Transfer of food was 23.
There alone, we budgeted $700,000, and now we're budgeting $250,000. That's a substantial decrease.
That's huge, absolutely. But that's only
450,000.
450,000 worth
That's
of
what I'm
million
saying.
you got.
That's
So-
one, and if we go back.
So where my skepticism comes in, right, and you said it yourself, right? Budgets go up, contracts go up that we can't impact, and inflation is outpacing everything. So,
On this slide, we have another $75,000. So even though there's an overall increase, we're still making cuts. You see what I'm saying?
yeah, no, I do. I mean, I get it. And listen, I like I said in the beginning, I know you don't really have the answer. I just want you to know where I'm at when I'm feeling, when I'm seeing this, because I can't get excited about $1 million budget line that can create revenue, and I can't get excited about staying so far under the allowable levy limit.
But to your point, we've already indicated almost $500,000 in cuts, even though overall there's an increase. You see how it's strange because you're saying, wait, it's a cut, but the budget's still going up. But if we're just talking about $1 million, we've already indicated almost $500,000 in cuts just in these codes.
Yeah, I know, that's why I wanna see the rest of them, because like I said, so, it's easy when you're looking at a portion of it to say, well, we made it here, but there's other spots. So I don't wanna take up too much time. I knew you wouldn't have exactly the answer, and I didn't expect it to, but I just wanted you to know where my frame of mind is when we're talking about, at this early stage, when we're talking about levy limits and we're saying we're not gonna be close to this, or we're not gonna do that, it's early yet, so I'd rather wait before we say that. So get excited about that.
And this is like a really important conversation to have. But I do think, I'm very confident in that we're not gonna approach that 4.6%. Because we're already projecting our, the 2000 codes, which are next, which is another like 50% of the budget. I think we'll be okay, and we'll be able to demonstrate those cuts. But ultimately, this is a budget process, and we're in step 3 of, several steps.
Okay.
But no, I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's important, and that's why I keep pointing it out. I'm pointing it out deliberately, because I don't want anybody to think I'm being manipulative or sneaking in $1 million. It's there, and I'm showing all the areas that are impacted by that $1 million.
And so, like from my standpoint, like I've said it too many times, like you make a promise that you can't unring that bell. So if we sit somewhere down the line and we realize, uh-oh, we need a little more than we thought, it's gonna be hard to have that conversation in a couple of weeks. So that's all, I just wanted that out there, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, my comment was that, I've said this before, that the way I look at the budget process, what I want to know is what do we need to run the business for the next year? And so by going through everything that you've outlined here, we see it for this portion of the business. And it does include the $1 million for capital improvements that we desperately need to be making. And I'm glad to see that there, because I've asked for that for several years, to have something like that in the budget so that we can have an ongoing capital improvement project. But the next question tags on to what Trustee Puccini says, is how are we gonna pay for it? And the problem sitting here tonight is we just have to be patient until we get the rest of this budget presentation. And for some of that, being patient is harder than for others. So I'm waiting to hear that. But could you just tell me at what point and in what budget presentation we're gonna hear what impact all of this has on our reserves, and whether or not we're gonna be on that roller coaster on the downside of the height, or whether we're going up?
So I'm gonna attempt to answer the question, and Mr. Gee, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think at the very end, when you look at, remember, the budget has to be balanced. So our revenues has to equal our expenses to have a balanced budget. So if, I'm gonna oversimplify it, I apologize, but if our expenses, or our budgeted expenses are $100, and our revenues equal 95, that's when we get into the discussion of reserves. And so that $5 gap isn't really revenue, it's use of our reserves, but that are included in the revenue column to balance the budget. So I think that's the point when we finalize all of our expenditures and we have a final number, and then we compare that to our final number for revenue, is when we'll know how, to what extent we need to use reserves, or whether or not we even have to use them at all for this upcoming school year.
And will that be in the meeting, like in April, after the governor's budget has gone through all its process? And I see Ms. Siki nodding at me,
Yeah,
but
it has to be
basically,
in-
we're not gonna know this for
Well, it has to be
another
in,
couple
right,
meetings.
but it has to be in before our proposed budget, because it's gonna be a part of the budget. Yeah. So it will be presented. But yeah, there's a lot of questions, and it is a long process. As you can tell, there's a lot of work behind it, and that's why we spread it over the course of many months. And being that this is my first sort of rodeo as a superintendent, I never really appreciated as an outsider the extent or the amount of work this takes and how long of a process it is. You know, as an outsider looking in, you kind of see the finished product, and you see a handful of lines and say, hey, just kind of make decisions. But there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of consulting that goes into, you know, a lot of these decisions. So you know, we have to be patient. But this is where we're at, and you know, I stand by my pledge that we're going to propose a budget that's going to be very palpable and reasonable for our community.
I'm going to ask just one final question, if there's no other questions. With next, in 3 weeks, right, is our next meeting, March 8th? And you're going to be speaking about the 2000 codes, curriculum and instruction. Will you also be speaking to attrition at that time, and if there'll be any savings realized from attrition?
So I believe that comes in our staffing analysis, which is March
So that's
22nd.
March 22nd, okay.
Yeah. So what we're doing, hoping to do at the March 22nd meeting, just to sort of give a little bit more context to our curriculum programs, is I would love to bring our presentation, our 6th grade program, to one of those meetings. I'll make my superintendent's report a little shorter to accommodate that presentation. And we have some really great things happening as a result of our instructional programs. We're going to be presenting, I guess I'll let the cat out of the bag, but we've been invited to the ASCD National Conference in Denver, Colorado, with Ms. Doyle and her team to be presenting on a national level our programs. So we would like to have that presentation held on March 22nd, which is literally the week before they'll be heading off to Colorado to represent the country on a national level. So again, that speaks to our program. So to answer your question, yeah. But during the staffing analysis, when we look at FTEs, retirements, and those type of things.
Does anybody have any final questions before we conclude?
Go.
All right.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. I had something and I forgot it. What did you just ask about again?
The attrition.
Oh, I'm
Savings
sorry.
from attrition.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we know now, and if you don't know off the top of your head, can we provide at least the number of employees that are eligible to retire? Because if I'm not mistaken, that number's kind of small.
I'm not sure.
If I remember correctly, that number is small. It was big last
This
year.
is
But I'm just
for
curious.
all bargaining units?
specifically faculty, but yeah, I'd like to know all. I mean, I just think as we're in this process, it'd be nice to know if that's a place to look for savings, if those staff members do, if, no sense talking about it later on if it's like 5, right? But if it's like 40, it's meaningful.
Correct.
So I think we should probably know that now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your time, and it may not be must-see TV, but we're trying to make it as entertaining as possible. Thank you all.
Oh.
Hold on. There we go. Nope, I got it. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right.
Back to it. So, the administration, we're up to curriculum agenda items, and the administration recommends approval of curriculum items reflected in schedules G1 through G4.
Do we have a motion and a second for G1 through G4? Motion by trustee Hayes and seconded by trustee Trent. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Seeing all hands raised, the motion passes unanimously. Item H.
The administration recommends approval of personnel changes reflected in schedules H1 through H8.
Okay, H1 through H8. Need a motion and a second. Motion by trustee Barry, seconded by trustee Kavanaugh. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Seeing all hands raised, the motion passes unanimously. Brings us up to I.
The administration recommends approval of business items reflected in schedules I1 through I6.
Okay, need a motion and a second for I1 through I6. Anyone interested? Okay, trustee Flippen, seconded by trustee Kavanaugh. Any discussion?
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Have we used this First National Bank before? We have?
Yeah.
Okay. Good to.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor for I1 through I6. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Seeing all hands raised, the motion passes unanimously.
At this time, before we can, I just want to thank Dr. Richard and Chantel Berman for donating the beautiful violin to our school district. It's kind of a classic violin, which is going to be really utilized and enjoyed. And also, I want to thank President Felice for donating a nice Nikon camera to our photography program. So something I haven't done in past board meetings is publicly acknowledge donations. I felt like we should just acknowledge it because we're always appreciative of people's generosity. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Can I just comment?
Sure.
In reading the memo that came with the donation for the violin, if I'm reading this right, it's made by a Bellport graduate.
It was
It was-
homemade, yeah.
Yeah,
That's neat.
it's pretty cool.
That was the South Country Education Foundation
Yeah.
auction. They presented that violin.
Well, I just wanted to highlight it.
Yeah, no.
absolutely.
Bellport graduates,
The
Do an awful lot of
graduate
good
is class of 1967 named Carl Thorndike.
1967.
67.
Don't make like that's a long time ago.
I apologize.
Some of us were around at that time. Okay. That brings us up to public commentary. Do we have any other cards? No other cards. Okay, then that brings us to meeting closing. Any other remarks by Board of Education members?
I do. I have something I completely forgot before. I'm so glad I remembered this. I heard today that our Bellport High School's own Andrew Budgers was named Social Studies Teacher of the Year for New York State.
Can I interrupt you?
Why? Did I ruin something?
We're gonna do something special for the man at our next board
Well,
meeting.
we have to announce it. He just got announced publicly.
Yes.
How can we
No,
not say it at the
absolutely,
board
absolutely.
meeting?
We're gonna hold it off
I
'cause
figured we would.
We wanted
but-
to make it special, but go ahead.
Well,
Trustee
Mr.
Coutinho.
Budgers, I hope I didn't ruin whatever special thing they had planned. I'm sure he'll get over it, but I really, honestly, I would have walked away feeling bad had we not mentioned
Oh,
it.
okay, yeah.
I mean, I would have, because he's probably one of the 4 people watching right now.
Perhaps. Mr. Budgers, if you're watching,
He's gonna send me
congratulations,
the-
well deserved.
Well, and I checked the YouTube channel. I know there's 4 people watching, so that wasn't a
Yeah,
flippant
so,
remark, so.
Yeah, for the trustees, and this was going to be included in my update tomorrow. Yeah, he was selected as New York State Social Studies of the Year, Teachers of, I can't even speak.
Quite an honor.
The New York State Social Studies Teacher of the Year, which is quite an honor.
There's only one of those, right?
That's right.
Wow.
That's really great.
Yes. Well, we'll have to come in and we'll do a more of a formal sort of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
All right, any other comment? I just want to close with Mr. Maresco, who is the president of the PTA Council. Thank him and Tara Botkins, who joined us at the legislative breakfast at Longwood. Thank you very much for joining myself and Vice President Hayes. It was a pleasure to have you there with us, and I hope you got as much out of it as we did. Thank you. All right, that brings us to motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn by trustee Trent, seconded by trustee Barry. All those in favor? All hands raised. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, trustee.